Discuss today's elections in Barbados, we now welcome Rahym Augustin Joseph, who's a political science student at the University of the West Indies. Rahym, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Why was a snap election called?
I mean, of course, I don't know that I want to impute any motives inside the head of the Prime Minister, Mia Motley, but I could repeat exactly what has been called, or at least what has been told from her own analysis, was that she said that the country needed to settle down. And she said that within the recent years, the country, because of COVID, because of the ashfall from St. Vincent, because of a lot of climate change and a lot of other perennial issues, that the country needed to receive, according to a new mandate, to be able to take them into some of these issues. Some have said, for the most part, that it seemed undemocratic. Of course, we know that within our Westminster type system, the Prime Minister has that prerogative to call the elections as soon as they believe fitting to do so. Of course, there are people touted as the Prime Minister at times walking around with a bell in their hand, sometimes taking it to the cabinet, sometimes taking it all about the country and really making a mockery out of the electoral process. And for some, they just see it as beautiful fanfare. Of course, the snap election has really reinvigorated cause across Barbados and across the region for fixed terms, and rather fixed election date, to be able to quell some of the issues. But according to the Prime Minister, the country needed to settle down. But some have questioned and said that it may just be political overplay because you have 3.5 years really within the tenure. You have 1.5 left, and you got a resounding mandate. And the extent to which the country needed to settle down, at times, according to some scientists and some commentators, really is questionable. And what it may have caused is really the recreation, or rather a start of a political process of stability for the Democratic Labour Party, considering that they wiped out all the polls the last time around.
Rahym, how important are today's elections for Barbados?
It's very important, very, very important, because I agree with the Prime Minister insofar as the country has a lot of important decisions to make within the next few months and years, considering the fact that the pandemic doesn't seem to be going away. But now that we know, after 2 or 3 years, you start to see the long-term effects of the pandemic. And to that extent, the social and economic pressures have already started to take place within the country, but more so, you would feel it more within the next few days. I don't doubt that today is a very important day for Bajans. But again, it's interesting, and the numbers that will reveal tonight will be very interesting statistic, considering the fact that they may have just been to the polls 3 years ago. More so for constituencies like St. George North, I believe, who just recently went to the polls to be able to vote for in a by-election for the representative Tony Moore. So what has happened there is really that the Barbadian public has been through an election cycle in the past few years. And therefore, you may have hesitancy to go out to the polls, considering the fact that they literally just came out of an election in 2018 and that the full election cycle did not go on.
Rahym, you touched on this, but what are the challenges ahead for the next government?
Well, the social and economic challenges are clear insofar as how do you deal with unemployment, considering that the pandemic has caused a lot of shutdowns? How do you reinvigorate a tourism sector that has been dealt a devastating blow because of the pandemic? More so, how exactly do you kickstart and continue the education revolution that the Prime Minister has spoken about, considering the fact that the pandemic has caused a lot of the physical education sector to have been devastated? But even more so, you have even the continuation of the dealing with the pandemic. You have the conversation, the constitutional reform continuing. You have a lot of a thought of other issues. Really, the continuation of the economic, stability for now, considering that Barbados has been in an IMF program for the past few years, and it means therefore that major sacrifices have to go. But I don't fully buy the argument, if I must say, about the major questions that need to be answered, because climate change has been there for the past few years. The pandemic has been there for a year plus. So yes, I don't doubt that there are major decisions to make, but I don't know that a new mandate takes away from the ability of the the administration as it currently stands to make some of these decisions. And therefore, as I said, some have termed it as political overplay on the part of the Prime Minister. And it really, according to some scientists who studied the history of Barbados, seems to be a Barbadian political leader type way, which means that insofar as some of them have had to show that, listen, we are in charge here, and we are able to catch, for example, the Democratic Labour Party off guard. Because I don't know that the opposition party based on the fact that he really didn't have full candidates in some instances a few weeks ago, was ready for that election. And therefore, to that extent, what their main tagline have continued to be is that we need to restore democracy in Barbados, because you know and I know about the 30-0 that they experienced last time at the polls.
Rahym, how might the results today and the composition of the new government shape relations with the wider Caribbean region?
I think it will continue as is. I think Barbados has continued to excel in the region in terms of diplomatic and democratic relations. I think they've been a leader in the world, as we know, on even the support of Venezuela. They've been a leader in climate change. They've been a leader against tax reform at the global stage. They've really led on that front, and I don't doubt that there are going to be a continuation of that very forceful foreign policy agenda. And as Barbados has been known by their first prime minister, who really made the point in relation to foreign relations that they want to be friends of all and satellites of none. So I don't see a change, because I don't doubt that the prime minister, Rahym, they'll be returned to the polls tonight, considering the political giant that she is, and considering the unreadiness and at the same time of the Democratic Labour Party, and that I don't doubt that it's going to be a safe election for her. And I think it may just very well mean business will continue as usual. And I guess some will then have to question the extent to which the election is already called for. So I think the relationship is going to continue as per normal. What would be interesting would be the composition of the cabinet. What would be whether they continue to go with the very same people that they had within the last administration. What would be interesting is other key positions within the administration, whether they start and turn a new leaf, or they continue from where they left off in 2021. These are the interesting developments. But more so, what I'm interested in is whether there will be any sort of, and I don't like to use the term, whether there will be, because the Westminster system allows for the 30 log, but whether there will be a return to democracy within the Parliament of Barbados. More so, what would happen in relation to the president of the Democratic Labour Party if she wins or does not win that seat tonight, considering that she shifted from a previous seat, which she was probably a bit more comfortable with it, to a new seat that is not necessarily a Democratic Labour Party stronghold. So you have that internal, I don't want to say internal rumblings, but rather internal rumblings within the Democratic Labour Party, considering that if it is that the political leader and the president does not necessarily win that seat, you now have an infighting for the leader of the opposition. But I think the election has really kickstarted democracy again within the Democratic Labour Party.
Rahym, as a young person in Barbados, how important was the transition to a republic, and how might that same transition impact on today's election?
I think it was very important. Some have termed it as symbolism. I think symbols matter. But I think because Barbados was really the first major experiment within the Western Hemisphere in the transatlantic slave trade, where really you saw a creation of a slave society. Because Barbados was born within the crucible of discrimination against people of color, against Black people, that move was more than a symbol. I think, of course, some would have wanted much wider conversation about the type of republic, because you know that it really is a parliamentary republic, with the replacement of the Governor General to a president. But I think it is significant. It's a significant moment, because Barbados has really for a long time been termed as Little England, because of that first experiment of enslavement that was created by Britain. You've had a situation where Barbados has been viewed as really the child of England. And to that extent, for Barbados to then take that bold move and say, listen, we are the ones that are going to be moving away from the England, and no hard feelings lost, but that this is a time where we chart a new destiny. Of course, I think the republicanism conversation continues, because you and I both know that the republicanism in its most purest form is not solely the replacement of a governor general with a president, but focuses on freedom of the press, focuses on many other civil and political liberties within the country, which I think that they need to continue providing the platform for. But I think it's important for this election, because Prime Minister Motley would have been the one to take Barbados to a republic. It has been a conversation from 1997 thereabout, 1992 or 1993, I believe, with the Ford Commission. It has gone through. It's gone through the time. Frondel Stewart mentioned it. Later Owenafa, God bless his soul, would have mentioned it. A lot of prime ministers in the past would have mentioned it. But Prime Minister Motley was the one to take Barbados over the line. And I think that is significant in this election.
Rahym, Barbados is now a republic. But as you've been explaining, it has a Westminster model in terms of its electoral system, in terms of its political system. Could we see potentially a change to that system to move away from the Westminster model?
I don't know that we're going to see a radical change. I think Caribbean countries, for the most part, have enjoyed the familiarity with the system. I think for the most part, people have been accustomed to really what the system provides, and really takes a great sense of resocialization and rethinking and thinking what the system entails. I think the conversation is going to continue. Conversation insofar as people continue to speak about the distortion of electoral results that the Westminster or rather the first past the post system has presented. And therefore, to that extent, you will see conversations about proportional representation. But I don't doubt that some major elements are still going to remain. What the Prime Minister has promised, should she be re-elected, or even before, was a very thorough process of constitutional reform. And some have already asked, but if it is that you had a supermajority, why is it that you not keep at it and therefore do the constitutional reform in January before it is that you go to the polls? But even more than that, in relation to electoral reform, I think really what has happened, and I wanted to mention it at the beginning, I think a lot of people have made the point of the disenfranchisement of the COVID-19 patients, considering that if it is that if you've tested positive for COVID-19, you're not able to vote. And therefore, to that extent, they've called on the Electoral and Boundaries Commission to be able to have provided the framework in which people could vote. Of course, when you look at the legislation, you could realize from analysis that it really was not only their call, and that the representation of the people to act have stated in very, very clear terms that the creation of polling stations must be in the designated polling constituency districts. And therefore, to that extent, the fact that people are quarantined at a separate location, I don't know that it would be legal to create that place as a polling station. So these are some of the issues that have been going around in relation to the election, but I think it's significant. And I see some electoral and constitutional reform happening in the future. I think, as a matter of fact, a few weeks ago, Barbados passed the Barbados Charter, and the Prime Minister, which is a non-legal binding document, which ready for her or for the government and the cabinet and the country, has said that this document is supposed to tell us who we are. This document is supposed to tell us in a very real way what we stand for, where we come from. And therefore, to that extent, you have that process going on in Barbados.
Rahym Augustin Joseph, a political science student at the University of the West Indies, thank you so much for joining us and for offering your very valuable insight into these important elections for Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Good night.